The sound reached Olivia Rayne first. Not a howl, but something far worse. A death rattle wrapped in fury. The kind of sound that came from a throat that had forgotten how to beg. She stood at the mouth of the silver quarry, modified mining pick heavy in her grip, and understood with crystalline clarity that crossing this threshold would either free her from everything she'd ever feared or bind her to something infinitely more terrifying. The resonance came again, a vibration of pure agony that didn't just reach her ears but invaded her chest, her bones, the dormant places inside her that she'd spent 23 years learning to ignore. This wasn't the sound of a rogue or a criminal. This was the sound of power being systematically destroyed, of sovereignty being torn apart one silver-burned breath at a time. Her records clerk's salary didn't cover acts of treason. Her low-ranking shifter status. No pack, no protection, barely a flicker of acknowledgement from the families who mattered, didn't grant her the luxury of rebellion. But that sound, God, that sound was the same one that lived in her own soul every time the council delegates walked past her desk without seeing her. Every time she filed another execution order and wondered if compassion was a death sentence waiting to happen. The silver quarry gaped before her like a wound in the earth, entrance reinforced with iron and elder wood, warnings carved deep into stone. The council's justice is absolute and mercy is treason, and other charming declarations that should have sent her running back to her tiny apartment in the outer districts where she belonged. The November wind cut through her worn jacket, carrying with it the acrid stench of silver poisoning and something darker. Obsidian dust, the kind mixed with molten silver to create chains that didn't just bind but consumed. Obsidian-laced silver. The punishment reserved for threats so catastrophic that even death was too merciful. The weapon of political erasure. Olivia's fingers tightened on the modified pick. She'd stolen it from the maintenance depot on pure instinct. The same instinct that made her slip away from her post during the council's evening session, even though everyone knew the outer quarries were monitored. Even though the penalty for interfering with a council prisoner was instantaneous execution. She should turn back. Should forget the resonance of suffering that matched the frequency of her own hidden power. The abilities she'd suffocated for so long that sometimes she forgot they existed at all. Should remember that low-ranking shifters who defied the council didn't just die. They were erased. Written out of pack history like they'd never drawn breath. But Olivia Rayne had spent her entire life being invisible, and she was so desperately tired of it. She stepped into the darkness of the silver quarry, and the temperature dropped 20 degrees. The sound intensified. Not louder but closer, as though it were crawling up her spine and nesting in the base of her skull. Her wolf, dormant and suppressed beneath layers of survival instinct, suddenly surged against her consciousness with a violence that nearly drove her to her knees. Mate. Dying. Save him. Save him. The word detonated through her mind like a curse and a benediction tangled into one impossible command. Olivia forced her legs forward, deeper into the quarry's throat, past cells that reeked of old death and fresh torture, until she reached the final chamber, and stopped breathing entirely. The wolf was massive, easily twice the size of any shifter she'd ever seen, with fur the color of obsidian smoke caught in moonlight. But it was the chains that made her stomach turn. Not simple silver shackles, but an intricate web of obsidian-laced links that had been driven through his body at strategic points, pinning him to the stone floor in a position of absolute submission. The metal glowed with a sickly blue-green light where it burned through flesh and fur, and she could see the tremors running through his massive frame, the way his breathing had become shallow and irregular. This wasn't imprisonment. This was a systematic execution designed to take days. Her gaze caught on something else. A brand burned into the stone above him, still smoking faintly with residual heat. The royal crest of the Ashworth line, the founding family, the bloodline that had ruled the Pax before the Council's rise to power. Before the purges. Before the Alpha King had supposedly died in a coup of his own making. Except that story had never made sense. And the wolf dying in chains before her wore a leather cord around his throat, half burned through, barely visible, with a sigil she recognized from the oldest archives. The mark of absolute sovereignty. Olivia's hands shook so hard the pick nearly fell from her grip. You're supposed to be dead, she thought, staring at the dying king. Asterisk, they said you tried to destroy the council. They said you were mad with power. They said asterisk. The wolf's eyes opened. Amber, cold as winter stars, and entirely aware. Entirely furious. They locked onto hers with an intensity that felt like being flayed alive, and she understood in that instant that he knew exactly what he was, exactly what she was risking, and exactly what would happen if she freed him. His lips pulled back from blood-stained fangs. Not a snarl. A warning. Or maybe a promise. Olivia raised the modified pick, aimed it at the central obsidian link, and made a choice that would shatter every chain in her life, including the ones she'd wrapped around herself. "I'm sorry I took so long," she whispered, and brought the pick down with everything she had. The link fractured. The chains exploded outward in a shower of silver and obsidian fragments. And the wolf shifted. The shift was violent. Not the smooth, controlled transformation Olivia had seen in council demonstrations, but something raw and primal that tore through reality itself. The wolf's form rippled, bones cracking and reforming with sounds that made her teeth ache, fur receding to reveal skin marked with burns and scars that told stories of systematic torture. And then he was there, a man naked and bloodied, on his knees in the wreckage of his chains. Ethan Ashworth, Alpha King, alive. He was terrifying, even broken. Tall enough that he'd tower over her when he stood, with a warrior's build that silver poisoning hadn't managed to completely destroy. His face was all brutal angles and aristocratic cruelty, the kind of beauty that came with an edge sharp enough to cut. Dark hair hung past his shoulders, matted with blood and obsidian dust. But it was his eyes that made Olivia's breath catch. Those amber eyes that had been cold as winter stars in his wolf form now burned with something far more dangerous. Recognition. Possession. Absolute certainty. "You," he said, and his voice was ruined gravel, raw from screaming and silver exposure. "You're the one." Olivia took a step back, her body finally catching up with the magnitude of what she'd done. She'd freed the exiled king. The man the council had spent 6 years telling the Pax was a tyrant, a madman who tried to seize absolute power and destroy the checks and balances that kept them all safe. The monster whose supposed death had ushered in the council's golden age of justice and prosperity. Except nothing about the regime felt golden when you were on the receiving end of it. She started, but he moved. Even poisoned, even barely able to stand. He was faster than anything she'd ever encountered. One moment he was on his knees in the wreckage of his chains, the next his hand was locked around her wrist with enough force to make her bones creak. He dragged her closer, his grip unbreakable, his body radiating heat that felt like fever and fury combined. "Do you know what you've done?" His face was inches from hers now, close enough that she could see the silver burns still smoking faintly on his skin, could smell blood and something darker underneath. "Do you have any idea what you've just triggered?" "I saved you," Olivia managed, trying to pull away and failing. Her wolf was going absolutely insane inside her consciousness, throwing itself against her control with a desperation she'd never experienced. "I heard you dying and You activated the bond." His free hand came up to grip her jaw, forcing her to meet those burning amber eyes. "You're my fated mate. The one the prophecy spoke of. The elemental shifter who would free the true king and break the council's corruption." The words hit her like physical blows. Fated mate. Elemental. Prophecy. Each one a death sentence in the council's regime, where bloodline abilities had been systematically hunted and destroyed, where the concept of fated bonds was considered dangerous superstition that undermined pack hierarchy. "No," she whispered. "I'm nobody. I'm just a records clerk. I don't have. You have everything." His thumb pressed against her lower lip, and she felt power crack through her like lightning seeking ground. "I can feel it in you. Buried so deep you've forgotten it exists. Earth elemental bloodline, so old and strong it makes my teeth ache. You've been hiding it your whole life, haven't you? Terrified the council would find you and do to you what they did to all the others." He wasn't wrong. Olivia had spent 23 years suffocating the strange connection she felt to stone and soil, the way she could sometimes sense things buried deep beneath the surface, The dreams where she moved mountains with nothing but will and fury. She'd watched the council execute elementals when she was 12. Public displays meant to remind everyone what happened to bloodlines that threatened the natural order. "I need that power," Ethan continued, his voice dropping to something that was almost gentle but infinitely more terrifying. "I need you. And I'm not asking for your permission." Before she could process the words, before she could even think to fight, his mouth crashed against hers in a kiss that felt like claiming and conquest, and something that bypassed her brain entirely to speak directly to the wolf she'd kept chained inside herself. Heat exploded through her body, starting at the point of contact and radiating outward in waves that felt like they were rewriting her at a cellular level. The bond snapped into place with the force of a natural disaster. Olivia felt his presence slam into her consciousness. Rage and pain and a ruthlessness that made her want to run screaming, but also centuries of pack knowledge, battle strategy, the weight of sovereignty that had been carved into his bones since birth. And underneath it all, a recognition so absolute it felt like coming home to a place she'd never known she was missing. Her power answered his call like a flower turning toward the sun. Or maybe like a weapon recognizing its wielder. The ground beneath them trembled. Cracks spiderwebbed across the stone floor of the quarry, and Olivia felt something vast and ancient wake up inside her chest. The earth itself was responding to her, and she didn't know how to stop it, didn't know how to push it back down now that Ethan had torn away every wall she'd built to contain it. "That's it," he murmured against her mouth, and she realized with distant horror that he was smiling. "Let it out. Show me what you really are." The trembling intensified. Dust rained down from the ceiling. And then she heard it. Footsteps, multiple sets, moving fast through the outer chambers of the quarry. Ethan's head snapped up, and the brief moment of something almost gentle vanished from his expression. What replaced it was pure predatory focus, the look of an apex predator who'd just caught the scent of prey. "They're here," he said flatly. "Your act of mercy just rang every alarm the council has. They know I'm free." The footsteps grew closer, accompanied by voices barking orders in the clipped, efficient tones of council enforcers. Olivia's heart kicked into overdrive as she recognized one voice rising above the others, smooth as poisoned honey, cultured accent barely masking something vicious underneath. Lucas Ironfong, the council's chief enforcer. The man responsible for more political disappearances than anyone wanted to count. Ethan Ashworth. Lucas's voice echoed through the quarry chambers, and Olivia heard genuine pleasure in it. "I must say I'm impressed. 6 years of silver exposure should have killed you 3 times over. Your resilience is almost admirable." Ethan moved in front of Olivia with fluid grace, positioning his body as a shield despite his own injuries. "Lucas. Still doing the council's dirty work, I see. How's it feel to be their favorite attack dog? Better than being their prisoner." Lucas appeared in the chamber entrance, flanked by 6 enforcers in council black, all armed with silver-loaded weapons. He was exactly as Olivia remembered from his occasional visits to the records department, tall and elegant, with refined features that would be handsome if not for the absolute emptiness in his pale blue eyes. "Though I'm curious about your little savior here. A low-ranking records clerk risking execution for the tyrant king. How touching." The way he said it made it clear he knew exactly who she was. Had probably known the moment she'd stepped into the quarry. Olivia's blood turned to ice as she realized the trap had been laid long before she'd arrived. "She's mine," Ethan said, and there was nothing human in his voice anymore. "My fated mate. And if you think I'm going to let you take her after 6 years of your hospitality, you're even stupider than I remember." Lucas's smile widened. "Fated mate. How delightfully archaic. The council will be fascinated to study her before the execution. An elemental bloodline. We thought we'd eliminated them all." His gaze shifted to Olivia, and she felt it like insects crawling across her skin. "Did you really think we didn't know about you, little clerk? We've been watching you since you were 16. Waiting to see if the power would manifest. And now, thanks to the king's rather dramatic activation of your bond, we finally have confirmation." The ground beneath Olivia's feet cracked wide open. She hadn't meant to do it. Hadn't even known she could. But terror and rage and the new bond singing through her veins combined into something she couldn't control, and the earth responded like it had been waiting decades for her permission to move. Stone erupted upward between them and the enforcers, forming a barrier of jagged rock that looked like teeth. "Run," Ethan commanded, his hand finding hers. Now. They didn't run. They couldn't. Not with 6 enforcers blocking the only exit and Lucas already moving to flank around the stone barrier Olivia had accidentally created. The jagged wall of rock wouldn't hold for more than seconds against trained council soldiers, and Ethan was still weak from silver poisoning. His legs unsteady beneath him despite the fury burning in his eyes. "I need more," Ethan said, his grip on her hand tightening to the point of pain. He pulled her against his chest, one arm locking around her waist while his other hand fisted in her hair, forcing her head back to expose her throat. "I need everything you've been hiding. Right now." "I don't know how," Olivia started, but his teeth grazed the vulnerable skin of her neck, right over her pulse point, and her words dissolved into a gasp that was half terror, half something she didn't want to name. "Then I'll show you." His voice was pure alpha command now, the kind of tone that bypassed conscious thought and spoke directly to the wolf that lived beneath her skin. "Open the bond. Stop fighting me. Stop hiding from what you are." She felt him push against the connection between them, felt his presence invade every corner of her consciousness that she'd spent decades fortifying against exactly this kind of vulnerability. It should have felt like violation. Should have made her want to fight and claw and run until she couldn't breathe. But instead, something in her recognized the touch of her mate and surged forward to meet him with a desperation that terrified her more than anything Lucas Ironfang could do. The bond exploded wide open. Power flooded through her like a dam breaking, like every wall she'd ever built to contain herself shattering simultaneously. She felt the earth beneath the quarry, not just the stone floor, but miles of rock and mineral deposits and ancient fault lines that ran through the mountain like veins. She felt every particle of soil in the forest above them, every root system, every buried stone that had been slowly grinding against its neighbors for millennia. It was too much, too vast, too overwhelming to possibly control. "Don't control it," Ethan murmured against her throat, and she realized with distant shock that he could feel her panic through the bond, could read her thoughts as easily as if she'd spoken them aloud. "Just point it where you want it to go. Let your instincts do the rest." The stone barrier shattered under Lucas's silver-loaded weapon, fragments exploding inward in a deadly spray. Olivia didn't think. She felt the trajectory of the shrapnel, felt the way stone wanted to move through space, and she simply reached out with her new awareness and changed its direction. The fragments whipped around in mid-air and shot back toward the enforcers like bullets. Men dove for cover, shouting in alarm as rock punched through body armor and drew blood. Lucas himself barely managed to throw up a defensive position behind the doorframe, his eyes widening with something that might have been respect or might have been hunger. "Magnificent," he called out over the chaos. "The council will be thrilled. An elemental this strong hasn't been seen in a generation. They'll keep you alive for months while they study how to extract and weaponize your abilities." Rage flooded through Olivia, not just her own, but Ethan's fury bleeding through the bond, amplifying her emotions until she couldn't tell where her feelings ended and his began. The floor beneath the enforcers buckled and cracked, stone warping upward in sharp spikes that forced them to scramble backward or risk impalement. "The tunnels," Ethan said, his voice strained with effort. She could feel his exhaustion through the bond, the way silver poisoning was still eating through his system despite his body's desperate attempts to heal. "There's an old mining shaft behind the far wall. Collapsed entrance, but you can open it." "How do you?" "I've been down here for 6 years. I've had time to map every inch of this pit." His grip on her shifted, and she realized he was barely staying upright, using her body as support while trying to look strong enough to fight. "The wall. 3 meters to your left. Feel for the hollow space behind it." Olivia closed her eyes and reached out with her new awareness. There, a void in the stone, a tunnel that had been deliberately sealed with rubble and reinforced concrete. The council's work, trying to erase all evidence of the old mining network that ran beneath the outer territories. She felt the individual pieces of debris, felt the way they'd been stacked and mortared together, and she understood instinctively how to unmake what had been made. The wall exploded outward in a shower of dust and broken stone, revealing a dark passage that smelled of damp earth and decades of disuse. At the same moment, Lucas and his remaining enforcers rushed the chamber, weapons raised and glowing with silver charge. Ethan shoved Olivia toward the tunnel opening. "Go! Not without you," she heard herself say, and meant it with an intensity that shocked her. This man had claimed her without permission, had forced open abilities she'd spent her entire life hiding, had made it clear he considered her property rather than person. She should want to leave him to face Lucas alone. Should take this chance to run while she still could. But the bond between them was a living thing now, and the thought of leaving him made her chest feel like it was caving in. "How touching," Lucas purred, raising his weapon to aim directly at Ethan's chest. The little clerk has developed feelings for her captor. Stockholm Syndrome is such a predictable. The back wall of the tunnel exploded inward, and a massive grey wolf burst through the debris with a snarl that shook dust from the ceiling. It crashed into the nearest enforcer with enough force to snap bones, teeth finding a throat before the man could even scream. The wolf was nearly as large as Ethan in his shifted form, with silver streaks through its grey fur and eyes that burned with intelligent fury. "Marcus," Ethan breathed, and Olivia felt his relief spike through the bond. "About damn time." The grey wolf, Marcus, disposed of 2 more enforcers with brutal efficiency before shifting mid-leap into a man who looked like he'd been carved from granite and bad decisions. He was shorter than Ethan but broader, with a scarred face and arms thick with muscle earned through violence rather than vanity. He landed in a crouch, naked and bloodied, with a feral grin that promised pain. "Your Majesty." His voice was rough gravel, matching Ethan's ruined tone. "Heard you were throwing a party. Thought I'd crash it." "The tunnels," Ethan commanded, already moving toward the opening with Olivia in tow. "North route. They'll have the southern exits covered by now." Marcus nodded once and shifted back to wolf form, positioning himself between them and Lucas's remaining forces. Olivia felt the ground tremble as another surge of power rolled through her, less controlled this time, responding to her fear and the adrenaline burning through her system. The ceiling groaned ominously. "You're collapsing the quarry," Ethan observed, not sounding particularly concerned about it. "Good instincts. Bury the evidence." "I'm not trying to." "Doesn't matter. Keep going." He pulled her into the tunnel mouth just as Marcus launched himself at Lucas with a roar that spoke of old grudges and long-anticipated violence. Behind them, stone began to rain from the ceiling in larger and larger chunks. The tunnel was pitch black and smelled of earth and forgotten places. Olivia stumbled over unseen obstacles, barely keeping her feet, while Ethan navigated with the confidence of someone who could see in the dark or had memorized every step through sheer desperation. She heard fighting behind them, snarls and gunfire and the distinctive crack of bones breaking. And then Marcus was there, human again, shoving them deeper into the passage. "Move faster," he growled. "Lucas is bringing down the mountain to bury us." Whatever power she just used, it pissed off something big. "That was me," Olivia managed between gasping breaths. The fault lines, I didn't mean to." "Fault lines." Marcus's voice climbed several octaves. "You triggered the seismic fault lines." The ground bucked beneath their feet like a living thing, and the tunnel filled with the grinding roar of stone moving against stone. Ethan grabbed Olivia around the waist and ran, Marcus flanking them as the passage behind them collapsed in a cascade of rock and dust that chased them like a living predator. They burst out of the tunnel into a forest glade just as the entire quarry system behind them imploded with a sound like the world ending. Olivia fell to her knees in the moss and leaf litter, gasping for air, while Ethan collapsed beside her and Marcus shifted back to human form with a groan that suggested multiple injuries. For a long moment nobody spoke. They just breathed and bled and tried to process the fact that they were somehow still alive. "So," Marcus finally said, looking between Ethan and Olivia with an expression that was equal parts disbelief and dark amusement. "This is the fated mate. The elemental who's going to help us destroy the council." "This is her," Ethan confirmed, his hand finding Olivia's again with possessive certainty. "And she's never leaving my side." Olivia stared at him, at the ruthless alpha king who'd claimed her without asking, who'd torn open every defense she'd built, who was looking at her now like she was simultaneously the solution to all his problems and the most dangerous weapon he'd ever wielded. "I don't remember agreeing to any of this," she said, but her voice was weak even to her own ears. Ethan's smile was all sharp edges and absolute certainty. "You agreed the moment you broke my chains. Everything after that is just details." The safe haven turned out to be a fortress carved into the heart of a mountain, hidden behind wards so old and complex that Olivia could feel them humming in her bones as Marcus led them through the concealed entrance. The stone itself had been shaped by elemental hands centuries ago, before the council had systematically hunted down every bloodline that posed a threat to their vision of natural order. Walking through passages that responded to her presence, doors opening at her approach, torches igniting with foxfire as she passed, felt like coming home to a place she'd never known existed. It also felt like a cage closing around her with Ethan Ashworth holding the key. "This was the old king's stronghold," Marcus explained as he guided them through corridors lined with ancient pack symbols. His wounds from the quarry fight were already healing, shifted metabolism burning through damage at an accelerated rate. "Built by the first Ashworth Alpha and his elemental queen. Been sealed for 6 years since." He trailed off, glancing at Ethan with something that looked like guilt and grief tangled together. "Since the council staged their coup and convinced the Pax I was trying to seize absolute power," Ethan finished flatly. He was leaning heavily on Olivia now, the adrenaline that had carried him through the escape finally wearing off to reveal the full extent of his silver poisoning. "Since they locked me in that quarry and erased everyone who knew the truth." They reached what must have been the central chamber, a vast circular room with a domed ceiling that depicted the night sky in luminescent stone. The floor was inlaid with silver that had been treated somehow to lose its lethal properties, forming a map of packed territories that predated the council's reorganization. Furniture that managed to be both ancient and pristine suggested the room had been preserved in stasis, waiting for its rightful owner to return. Ethan collapsed into a chair that looked like a throne, trying to pretend it was casual seating. His skin had taken on a grayish cast, and Olivia could feel his pain through the bond, a constant burning that made her want to claw at her own skin in sympathy. "He needs rest," she said to Marcus, hating how her voice shook. "And a healer. The silver poisoning will kill me eventually if we don't neutralize it," Ethan agreed with disturbing calm. "But we don't have time for rest. Lucas knows I'm free. He knows about you. The council will mobilize every resource they have to hunt us down before we can expose what they've done." His amber eyes locked onto hers with predatory focus. "Tell me about your job. The records department. What kind of access did you have?" Olivia's throat went dry. She'd spent 3 years filing documents for the council's administrative offices, invisible and insignificant, exactly the way she'd wanted to be. Except now she was realizing that invisibility had given her access to things she'd been trained not to question. "I processed execution orders," she said slowly. "Territorial disputes. Pack reorganization files. I had clearance for the historical archives because someone needed to cross-reference precedent for council rulings." She met Ethan's gaze and saw the moment he understood what she was saying. "I saw everything. I just didn't know what I was looking at." "But you remember." It wasn't a question. Ethan leaned forward despite the obvious pain it cost him. "You have that kind of mind, the type that catalogs and stores information even when you're not trying. I can feel it through the bond. You noticed patterns." She had. God help her, she had noticed. Execution orders that didn't match the crimes listed. Territory redistributions that benefited council members' pack allies. Historical precedents that were cited incorrectly or taken wildly out of context. She told herself it wasn't her place to question, that low-ranking shifters who pointed out inconsistencies in council decisions tended to disappear into quarries just like the one she'd found Ethan in. There were files, Olivia admitted, the words feeling like treason even now. Sealed archives from before the council's rise to power. I wasn't supposed to access them, but the filing system was disorganized and sometimes documents got misfiled into my clearance level. I saw reports about Alpha King Ethan Ashworth investigating corruption in the territorial governance system. About elemental bloodlines being systematically targeted. About evidence that the council staged the coup that put them in power. Ethan finished. Evidence I was gathering before Lucas and his enforcers ambushed me during a diplomatic summit. They killed everyone who was with me that night. My advisors, my guards, my... His voice cracked slightly before he caught himself. Everyone except Marcus, who managed to escape and has been working underground ever since. Marcus nodded grimly from his position by the door. We've been trying to build a resistance, but without proof, the Pax won't turn against the Council. They've had 6 years of propaganda about the Mad King who tried to destroy Pact democracy. 6 years of council prosperity while they quietly eliminated anyone who remembered differently. But Olivia remembers, Ethan said, and the way he looked at her made her feel like a weapon being examined for sharpness. And more than that, she has elemental abilities that can extract truth from the earth itself. Stone remembers Olivia. Every building, every archive, every place where blood was spilled or contracts were signed. You can read it all if you learn how. The implications crashed over her like a physical weight. He didn't just want her as his mate. He wanted her as his tool, his means of vengeance, his key to reclaiming power. And the bond between them meant she could feel his absolute conviction that she would do exactly what he needed because she belonged to him now in a way that transcended choice. "I'm not a weapon," she said, but her voice was weak. "Yes, you are." Ethan stood with visible effort and crossed to where she stood frozen in the center of the ancient map. "You're the most powerful weapon in this war. And you're mine." His hand came up to cup her face with surprising gentleness that made the possessiveness somehow worse. "I know you're afraid. I know this isn't what you wanted. But the moment you freed me, you became part of this whether you like it or not. The Council will never stop hunting you. Your only chance of survival is to help me destroy them first. And if I refuse?" Olivia challenged, even though she could feel through the bond that refusal wasn't really an option he was offering. Ethan's smile was cruel and honest. "Then I'll make you do it anyway. I'm not a good man, Olivia. I'm a king who spent 6 years being tortured for trying to expose corruption, and I will use every tool at my disposal to finish what I started. Including you. Especially you." His thumb brushed across her cheekbone. "But I'm hoping you'll choose to help me willingly. Because the version of this where we work together is much better than the version where I have to force your cooperation every step of the way." She should hate him. Should use her newly awakened powers to bury him under the same stone that had imprisoned him. Should run as far and fast as she could and never look back. But the bond was a living thing in her chest, and she could feel his pain and his rage, and underneath it all, a desperate hope that maybe, just maybe, she would understand why he had to be ruthless to survive. "Show me," Olivia heard herself say. "Show me how to read stone. How to find the truth you need." Something flickered in Ethan's eyes. Relief maybe, or satisfaction, or something darker that she didn't want to name. "Now. You said we don't have time to waste." She pulled away from his touch, needing the distance even though the bond protested. "And you're right that I can't go back to my old life. The Council knows about me. They'll kill me on sight. So if I'm trapped in this, I want to be useful. I want to matter." "You matter," Ethan said with absolute certainty. "You're the key to everything." The training started immediately, despite Marcus's protests about rest and healing. Ethan led Olivia to a chamber deep in the mountain's heart where the stone walls were carved with symbols that made her head ache to look at directly. The floor was bare bedrock, ancient and layered with millennia of geological memory. Stone remembers pressure, Ethan explained, his voice taking on the cadence of a teacher despite his exhaustion. Every force that's ever been applied to it, every change it's endured. For an earth elemental, that memory is accessible. You just have to learn to listen. He made her practice for hours, pushing her to reach deeper and deeper into the stone beneath her feet. At first, she felt nothing but her own frustration and the constant ache of Ethan's silver poisoning bleeding through their bond. But gradually, painstakingly, she began to sense something else. Echoes of weight and heat. The memory of an ocean that had covered this land millions of years before mountains existed. The slow grind of continental plates. The sudden violence of volcanic formation. Good, Ethan murmured from where he watched her work. Now go deeper. More recent. Find the human memory. Olivia pressed her palms flat against the stone floor and reached with everything she had. The recent memories were harder somehow, less absolute than geological time, more fragmented and emotional. But she caught flashes of them. Ethan as a younger man, learning these same techniques from someone whose face she couldn't quite see. Marcus and others whose names she didn't know, planning in this very chamber. And then violence. The night of the coup, blood on ancient stone, Ethan being dragged away in silver chains while the fortress sealed itself behind wards that would wait 6 years for his return. She gasped and pulled back, overwhelmed by the intensity of the memories. Ethan was there immediately, his hand steadying her even though the touch cost him pain from his injuries. You felt it, he said. The truth the council tried to bury. That's what we're going to do. Extract every piece of evidence they've hidden, every lie they've told, every crime they've committed. And then we're going to force the Pax to see it. Over the following days, the training intensified until Olivia couldn't tell where her own exhaustion ended and Ethan's began. He pushed her relentlessly, demanding more precision, more control, more power than she thought she possessed. When she faltered, he would reinforce the bond between them, sometimes gently, sometimes with a ruthlessness that made her want to fight him even as her body responded to his touch. I hate that you can manipulate me like this, she told him after he'd used the mate bond to bypass her mental exhaustion and force her to continue practicing when she was ready to collapse. I know, Ethan replied without apology. But I need you functional more than I need you happy. We can address your feelings about my methods after the council is destroyed. And what makes you think I'll stay after that? Olivia challenged. Once you have what you need from me. Ethan's laugh was harsh and entirely humorless. You're my fated mate. The bond between us is permanent. You'll stay because leaving would feel like tearing off your own skin. I'll stay because you're the only person in existence who can make this constant silver burning feel like something other than torture. He caught her chin, forcing her to meet his eyes. We're bound together whether we like it or not. I'm just honest enough to admit I'll use that bond to get what I need. You're a bastard, she whispered. I'm a king, he corrected. And you're my queen, even if you don't want the crown. Now get back to work. We have 2 weeks at most before Lucas tracks us to this location, and you need to be ready to extract evidence from the council archives when we make our move. Olivia returned to the stone floor, pressed her hands against ancient rock, and reached into its memory with a skill that was growing more precise each day. She hated that Ethan was right. Hated that she could feel his satisfaction through their bond as she succeeded. Hated that some part of her was starting to understand why he had to be ruthless, why softness was a luxury neither of them could afford. But most of all, she hated that when he looked at her with those amber eyes that burned with absolute possession, she couldn't quite bring herself to wish she'd left him chained in that quarry to die. Marcus found her later that night, sitting in one of the fortress's ancient gardens where somehow flowers still bloomed despite centuries of neglect. He's pushing you too hard, the beta observed, settling onto a stone bench that groaned under his weight. He doesn't have a choice, Olivia said tiredly. The council will still be there tomorrow, and the day after. Marcus's scarred face was unexpectedly gentle. I've known Ethan since we were children. I was there when his father taught him that kings don't get the luxury of kindness. That power requires sacrifice and ruthlessness and using every resource available without sentiment. But you're not just a resource, Olivia. You're his mate. And somewhere under all that trauma and rage, I think he knows that. He's just terrified that if he treats you like something precious, the council will take you away the same way they took everything else. Olivia thought about that as she made her way back to the chamber Ethan had claimed as his own. She found him collapsed across the bed, finally surrendered to exhaustion, silver burns still smoking faintly on his skin. The ruthless Alpha King looked almost human in sleep, almost vulnerable. She climbed into the bed beside him because the bond demanded proximity and because she was too tired to fight it. Ethan's arm came around her immediately, even unconscious, pulling her against his chest with possessive certainty. "I'm still angry at you," she whispered into the darkness. "Good," he mumbled against her hair. "Anger means you're strong enough to survive what's coming." And despite everything, Olivia felt herself relax into his hold, the constant ache of his pain through their bond finally easing as her presence helped his body heal. They were bound together in ways she was only beginning to understand. Trapped in a war neither of them had chosen, but both of them had to win. Tomorrow they would train again. She would learn to extract truth from stone, and Ethan would push her past every limit she thought she had. But tonight, in the darkness of an ancient fortress, the reluctant queen and her ruthless king found something that almost resembled peace. The grand tribunal hall had been built to intimidate, and it succeeded magnificently. Carved from a single massive outcropping of granite that jutted from the earth like a tooth, the structure rose 7 stories high with walls thick enough to withstand siege weaponry. Inside, the main chamber could hold representatives from every major pack in the territories. And today it did. Hundreds of alphas, betas, and delegates filled the tiered seating that circled the central floor, their combined presence creating a pressure in the air that made Olivia's teeth ache. She stood beside Ethan at the challenger's position, acutely aware that every eye in the hall was fixed on them with expressions ranging from shock to fury to something that might have been hope buried under 6 years of council propaganda. Ethan had cleaned up remarkably well considering 2 weeks ago he'd been dying in silver chains. He wore formal alpha regalia that Marcus had somehow procured, black leather and ceremonial armor marked with the Ashworth crest. His dark hair pulled back to reveal the aristocratic brutality of his face. He looked every inch the king he claimed to be. He also looked like he was in constant agony from silver poisoning that still hadn't fully cleared his system, though only Olivia could feel that through their bond. "Steady," Ethan murmured without looking at her, his hand finding hers with possessive certainty. "Remember what we practiced. Wait for my signal. And no matter what they say about me, no matter what evidence they present, trust that I know what I'm doing." Olivia nodded, her heart hammering against her ribs. She wore the formal dress Marcus had insisted on, deep green that brought out her eyes and, more importantly, marked with elemental symbols that hadn't been seen publicly in decades. Her appearance was a statement of defiance, a declaration that the bloodlines the council claimed to have eliminated were very much alive. The council sat in their elevated positions above the main floor, 7 members who collectively held more power than any Alpha King ever had. High Alpha Thane occupied the central seat, a man in his 60s with silver hair and the kind of face that projected paternal authority. He'd been the one to reluctantly assume leadership after Ethan's supposed treason, and he'd spent 6 years convincing the Pax that democratic council rule was superior to the old monarchy. Lucas Ironfang stood at his right hand, and the look he gave Olivia promised slow, creative death if he ever got his hands on her again. "Ethan Ashworth." Thane's voice carried through the hall with practiced ease, amplified by acoustics that had been designed for exactly this purpose. "You stand accused of treason against the Pact territories, of attempting to seize absolute power, of ordering the execution of council members who opposed your tyranny, and of conspiring with rogue elements to overthrow legitimate Pact governance. 6 years ago you were sentenced to death for these crimes. Yet you appear before us now, having somehow survived your execution and broken sacred council justice." He leaned forward, and his expression was everything a disappointed father should be. "Do you deny these charges?" "I deny every single one of them," Ethan replied, his voice cutting through the hall like a blade. "And I'm here to prove that this council gained power through systematic murder, that every charge against me was fabricated, and that you, High Alpha Thane, are guilty of precisely the crimes you've accused me of committing." The hall erupted into chaos. Alphas shouting, delegates arguing, the sound building to a roar that rattled the ancient stone. Thane let it continue for precisely long enough to demonstrate that Ethan's words had created disorder, then raised his hand for silence. The hall obeyed with the kind of immediate compliance that spoke to 6 years of conditioning. "Serious accusations," Thane said mildly. "I assume you have evidence to support these claims. Or is this simply the desperate flailing of a convicted traitor who cannot accept his own guilt?" "I have evidence," Ethan confirmed. "Witness testimony from survivors of the night you staged your coup. Documentation that proves the execution orders I supposedly gave were forgeries. And," his grip on Olivia's hand tightened, "something you didn't anticipate 6 years ago. An earth elemental who can extract truth from the very stone this hall is built from." The reaction was immediate and electric. Every eye in the hall fixed on Olivia with expressions that ranged from fascination to outright terror. Elementals were legends, cautionary tales, the boogeyman the council used to justify their periodic purges of dangerous bloodlines. Seeing one standing alive in the tribunal hall was like watching a ghost materialize. "Impossible," Thane said, but Olivia heard the slight tremor in his voice. "Earth elementals were eliminated decades ago. They were too dangerous, too prone to madness and destruction. This is clearly some kind of trick." "Then let me prove it's not." Ethan turned to face the assembled packs, and when he spoke, his voice carried the absolute authority of someone born to command. "I challenge the council's legitimacy under ancient pack law. I demand a formal investigation into the charges against me, conducted with full transparency before all present alphas. And I invoke the right of stone truth. Let the earth itself bear witness to what happened 6 years ago." The right of stone truth. Olivia had found references to it in the oldest archives during her training, an ancient practice where elementals would extract memories from locations where significant events had occurred, displaying them for all to see. It hadn't been used in over a century because there hadn't been any elementals alive to perform it. Till now. "The council does not recognize obsolete rituals," Lucas interjected, his pale eyes fixed on Olivia with predatory intensity. "Especially not rituals that require the participation of illegal bloodlines." "Then the council is afraid of the truth," Ethan countered. "Interesting position for a governing body that claims absolute moral authority." Thane's expression hardened. "Very well. If you insist on this farce, we'll indulge you. But when your so-called evidence proves to be nothing but fabrication and parlor tricks, your sentence will be carried out immediately, along with the sentence of your elemental accomplice." He gestured to Lucas. "Present the council's evidence first. Let the pack see exactly what kind of monster Ethan Ashworth truly is." What followed was a masterclass in political manipulation. Lucas presented document after document, each one seemingly proving Ethan's guilt beyond question. Execution orders bearing Ethan's seal. Witness statements from council members describing his increasingly erratic behavior and threats. Financial records showing he'd been siphoning pack resources to build a private army. Even testimony from alphas who claimed they'd been present when Ethan had threatened to eliminate anyone who opposed his vision for absolute monarchy. It was all lies. Olivia could feel Ethan's rage through their bond, the way his control was fraying at the edges as he watched 6 years of carefully constructed falsehoods presented as unassailable fact. But he'd warned her this would happen. Had told her that Thane would present his case first, that the packs would need to be on the verge of turning against Ethan completely before the truth would have maximum impact. "Damning evidence," Thane said when Lucas finally finished. "I think we can all agree that—" "You're not finished," Ethan interrupted. "You've presented documents and testimony. Now present the physical evidence." Show them the room where I supposedly planned my coup. Show them the weapons I allegedly stockpiled. Show them anything beyond paper and words. Thane's smile was coldly amused. The room where you planned your treason was destroyed in the conflict when you were captured. The weapons were confiscated and melted down to prevent them falling into the wrong hands. You know this, Ashworth. You were there. I was there, Ethan agreed. Which means I know you're lying. That room still exists. Those weapons were never real. And the only reason you won't show physical evidence is because the moment anyone with actual investigative skills examines it, your entire fabrication falls apart. This is pointless, Lucas said flatly. The evidence speaks for itself. Execute him and be done with it. But Ethan had accomplished what he'd intended. He'd planted doubt. Olivia could see it in the faces of some of the alphas, the ones who'd always found the official story slightly too convenient. The ones who remembered that Ethan had been known for his integrity before the council's rise to power. Then let's remove all doubt, Ethan said, turning to Olivia. Show them the truth. All of it. This was the moment they'd trained for. Olivia stepped forward, feeling hundreds of eyes track her movement, and pressed her palms flat against the granite floor of the tribunal hall. The stone was ancient, older than the council, older than the concept of pack governance itself. It had witnessed everything that had happened in this place for centuries. She reached down with her awareness, pushing past the recent memories of today's tribunal, past years of council meetings and political maneuvering, searching for the night 6 years ago when everything had changed. The stone resisted at first, not because it wanted to hide the truth, but because the memory she was searching for was buried under deliberate attempts to obscure it. Someone had tried to erase what happened, smoothing over the evidence like filling a crack. But stone remembered. It always remembered. Olivia found the seam where the memory had been hidden, and tore it open with a surge of power that made the entire hall tremble. The floor beneath her hands began to glow with that same foxfire luminescence she'd seen in the ancient fortress, spreading outward in waves until covered the entire central floor. And then the memory erupted upward in a display of light and shadow that was more vivid than any recording technology could achieve. The hall gasped as one. The memory showed the tribunal hall 6 years ago, this same room but filled with different faces. Ethan stood in the challenger's position, younger and less scarred, addressing the council with evidence spread before him. Documents, testimony, proof that council members had been systematically eliminating political rivals, redistributing territories to their allies, and suppressing bloodlines they considered threats to their power. You're corrupt, Memory Ethan said, his voice ringing through both past and present. Every one of you. And I have enough evidence to prove it to every alpha in the territories. Step down peacefully, or I'll have you removed by force of law. Memory Thane smiled the same paternal smile he'd worn today. I'm afraid we can't allow that. The memory showed Lucas and a dozen enforcers emerging from concealed positions, weapons drawn. Showed Ethan's guards being cut down before they could react. Showed Ethan himself fighting with desperate fury before being overwhelmed and wrapped in silver chains. And then, most damningly, showed Thane calmly producing a set of forged documents while Ethan lay bleeding on the floor. We'll say he tried to stage a coup, Memory Thane explained to Lucas. That he attempted to assassinate the council and seize absolute power. Witnesses will corroborate our story or they'll join him in the quarry. By tomorrow, Ethan Ashworth will be a cautionary tale about the dangers of unchecked monarchy, and the council will have the moral authority to eliminate any other bloodlines that might threaten our governance. Including the elementals, Memory Lucas added with obvious satisfaction. Especially the elementals, Memory Thane confirmed. The memory ended, the glow faded, and the tribunal hall sat in absolute shocked silence. Olivia wasn't finished. She reached deeper, extracting memory after memory from the stone. Council meetings where they'd planned assassinations, conversations about redistributing territories, discussions about which bloodlines to target next. Every crime they'd committed over 6 years of rule, displayed in excruciating detail for hundreds of witnesses to see. When she finally pulled back, gasping and shaking from the exertion. The evidence was irrefutable. The council's corruption was laid bare, impossible to deny or explain away. Lies, Thane said, but his voice had lost its paternal warmth. Elemental manipulation. She's creating false memories, making you see what Ashworth wants you to see. Stone doesn't lie, came a voice from the assembled alphas. An older woman with gray hair and scars that spoke of long service stood from her seat. I'm old enough to remember earth elementals. Old enough to know their gift shows only truth. She looked at Thane with contempt. What we just saw was real. All of it. Other alphas stood. More voices joined the first. The tide was turning, and Olivia could see panic beginning to crack through Thane's composed exterior. This is treason, Lucas snarled, reaching for his weapon. All of you. You're falling for an obvious trick. The only trick was yours, Ethan said, and his voice carried the full weight of royal authority. For 6 years, you've ruled through fear and manipulation. You eliminated anyone who threatened your power. You perverted justice and called it governance. And you tried to erase me because I was about to expose everything. He looked at the assembled alphas, at faces that were showing shock and rage and the dawning realization that they'd been lied to for years. I am Ethan Ashworth, rightful Alpha King of these territories. And I'm reclaiming my throne. Lucas moved with the speed of desperation, his weapon rising toward Ethan. But Olivia was faster. She slammed her power into the stone beneath his feet, and it erupted upward in spikes that forced him to dodge or be impaled. Marcus, who'd been waiting in the wings, shifted mid-leap and crashed into Lucas with enough force to drive them both across the floor. Chaos erupted. Council loyalists tried to fight, but they were vastly outnumbered by alphas who'd just seen undeniable proof of corruption. Thane attempted to flee, but found his path blocked by delegates who'd spent 6 years following orders they'd never quite believed in. Ethan walked through the chaos like he owned it, which Olivia supposed he did. He approached Thane with the inevitability of a storm, and when he spoke, his voice was soft enough that only those nearby could hear. You put me in chains, Ethan said. You tried to erase me. But you forgot something important about kings, Thane. We're not just born. We're forged. And you just spent 6 years making me stronger than you could possibly imagine. He gestured to the enforcers who were now restraining the former High Alpha. Take him to the quarry. Let him see what he built. And then let him die there, the same way he intended for me. It was ruthless. It was cruel. It was exactly the kind of justice that Ethan Ashworth had been shaped to deliver. Olivia watched Thane being dragged away, screaming protests that no one listened to, and felt nothing but cold satisfaction through her bond with Ethan. The hall gradually quieted as the last of the council loyalists were subdued. Ethan stood in the center of the floor, bloodied and exhausted but unbowed, and raised his voice to address the assembled packs. 6 years ago, I tried to stop corruption through lawful means. The council responded with treason and murder. Today, I've proven their crimes beyond any doubt. He looked around the hall, meeting eyes and holding them. I am reclaiming the throne that is mine by right and by law. But I will not rule as my ancestors did, as a lone king deciding the fate of all packs. The council was right about one thing. Absolute power in one person's hands is dangerous. His hand found Olivia's, pulling her forward to stand beside him. I will rule with my queen, Olivia Ashworth, earth elemental and fated mate, who has the power to extract truth from the earth itself. Together, we will rebuild what the council destroyed. We will restore justice. And we will ensure that no one, not me, not her, not anyone, can ever again subvert pack law for personal gain. The hall erupted in sound, some cheering, some arguing, some simply processing the massive shift in power they'd just witnessed. But underneath it all, Olivia felt the shift in political gravity. Ethan had won. The council was destroyed. And she, the low-ranking records clerk who just wanted to save a dying wolf, was now standing before hundreds of alphas being declared their queen. Ethan's grip on her hand tightened. Through the bond, she felt his triumph and relief and something that might have been gratitude, buried deep under layers of ruthless calculation. "Still angry at me?" he murmured under the noise of the celebrating and arguing packs. Olivia looked at him, at the Alpha King who'd claimed her without permission, who'd forced her to embrace power she'd spent her life hiding, who'd used her as a weapon to reclaim his throne. She thought about the 2 weeks of brutal training, the way he'd manipulated their bond to get what he needed. His absolute refusal to ever let her go. Furious, she confirmed. But also, she gestured at the hall, at the evidence of corruption now exposed, at the justice that was finally being served. Also proud. We did this. We actually did this. Ethan's smile was fierce and genuine. No, you did this. I just pointed you in the right direction. He raised their joined hands, displaying them to the assembled packs. All hail Queen Olivia Ashworth, the elemental who broke the council's lies. The cheering intensified. And Olivia, still exhausted from the massive display of power, still processing the fact that her entire life had been rewritten, found herself smiling back at the ruthless king who'd refused to let her go. Maybe being his weapon wasn't the worst fate after all. Not if it meant she could tear down corruption and build something better in its place. The coronation took place 3 weeks after the tribunal, in the same hall where Olivia had torn apart the council's lies. The space had been transformed. The stone floor she'd used to extract truth now polished until it gleamed, the walls hung with banners bearing both the Ashworth crest and a new symbol, intertwined wolf and earth, representing the union of sovereign and elemental. Every major pack in the territories had sent representatives, and this time they came not out of obligation but genuine curiosity about what kind of rule would emerge from the ashes of the council's regime. Olivia stood in an antechamber adjoining the main hall, staring at her reflection in a mirror that was probably older than most pack bloodlines. The dress they'd created for her was a masterpiece of strategic symbolism, deep forest green that spoke to her elemental nature, cut in a style that managed to be both regal and warrior practical, with the Ashworth crest embroidered over her heart and elemental symbols woven through the fabric in silver thread that had been specially treated to lose its lethal properties. Her hair had been arranged in an elaborate style that made her look older, more commanding, less like the terrified records clerk who'd stumbled into a quarry, and more like someone who could stand beside an Alpha King. She barely recognized herself. "Stop fidgeting," Marcus said from his position by the door, where he'd been standing guard with a kind of protective intensity that suggested he took his role as Beta very seriously. Over the past 3 weeks, he'd become something like a friend, or at least an ally who occasionally took her side when Ethan's ruthlessness crossed lines even Marcus found questionable. "You look like a queen. Act like one." "I don't know how to act like a queen," Olivia admitted, adjusting the crown that sat on a nearby table, a delicate circlet of platinum and earth stones that Ethan had commissioned specifically for her. 3 weeks ago, I was filing paperwork and trying not to be noticed. Now I'm supposed to co-rule an entire territory of packs who spent the last 6 years being told that elementals are dangerous abominations. "You are dangerous," Marcus pointed out with a slight smile. "You brought down an entire corrupt regime with nothing but your ability to make rocks remember things. That's the kind of dangerous we need right now." His expression sobered. "The packs are terrified of what comes next. They need to see strength. They need to see that you and Ethan are unified, that you have a vision for something better than what the council gave them." Before Olivia could respond, the door opened and Ethan entered. He was already dressed in his formal regalia, black and silver, with the crown of the Alpha King resting on his dark hair like it had never left. The silver poisoning had finally cleared from his system, and he moved with the predatory grace she remembered from that first moment in the quarry, when he'd shifted from dying wolf to terrifying king. 3 weeks of proper food and rest, and the healing presence of his mate, had restored him to something beyond merely dangerous. He looked like sovereignty personified, like the kind of ruler who could reshape territories through sheer force of will. Marcus took one look at Ethan's expression and made himself scarce, closing the door behind him with more speed than dignity. "You're nervous," Ethan observed, crossing to where Olivia stood frozen in front of the mirror. His hands settled on her shoulders, and she felt the bond between them hum with his presence. I can feel it through our connection. Talk to me. I'm about to be crowned queen in front of hundreds of alphas who have every reason to hate what I represent, Olivia said, meeting his eyes in the mirror's reflection. I think nervous is an appropriate response. They don't hate you. Ethan's hands moved from her shoulders to her waist, pulling her back against his chest with possessive certainty. They're afraid of you. There's a difference. Hatred is what they felt for the council, rage at being manipulated and lied to. What they feel for you is the same thing they feel for me. Oh, terror. And underneath it all, hope that maybe someone with real power will actually use it to protect them instead of exploiting them. Olivia leaned into his hold despite herself, feeling the steady rhythm of his heartbeat against her back. The bond between them had deepened over the past 3 weeks. Not softened exactly, but evolved into something more complex than simple possession. She still bristled at his high-handed decisions and ruthless methods. He still manipulated their connection when he needed her cooperation. But they'd also started to understand each other in ways that went beyond words. Are you ready for this? She asked. 6 years you spent planning revenge, and now you have it. The council is destroyed. Thane is dead. Lucas is awaiting execution. You have your throne back. What happens when there's nothing left to fight for? Ethan turned her in his arms, his amber eyes intense. Then we build something worth protecting. The council was right that the old ways were broken. One king deciding the fate of all packs led to corruption just as surely as their system did. But what they built was worse. Bureaucratic tyranny disguised as democracy. His hand came up to cup her face with the kind of gentleness that still surprised her when he showed it. We're going to do something different. A king and a queen who rule together. My sovereignty balanced by your ability to literally extract truth from the earth itself. Power checked by accountability. And if we become the very thing we destroyed, Olivia challenged, if we turn corrupt and cruel, then someone will rise up to stop us, the same way we stopped the council. Ethan's smile was fierce and honest. That's the whole point. No one should be above justice. Not even us. Especially not us. He picked up her crown from the table, holding it with reverence. This isn't just a symbol of power, Olivia. It's a promise. That will be better than what came before. That will break the chains of the past and forge something new. He placed the crown on her head, adjusting it with careful precision until it sat perfectly. Then he stepped back and looked at her with an expression that made her chest feel tight. Perfect, he said softly. My elemental queen. The woman who freed me and saved me and refused to let me be anything less than the king I was meant to be. I'm still angry with you sometimes, Olivia said, needing him to understand that the crown didn't erase the complicated nature of how they'd come together. For claiming me without permission. For forcing the bond. For using me as a weapon. I know. Ethan offered his arm. And you have every right to be. But you're mine anyway. And I'm yours. That's the nature of fated bonds. They don't care about timing or consent or convenience. They just are. His expression turned serious. I'm not going to apologize for doing what I had to do to survive and to destroy the council. But I will promise you this. From today forward, you're not just my weapon or my mate. You're my equal. My co-ruler. And I will never make a decision about our packs without your input. It wasn't everything Olivia might have wanted. It wasn't a fairy tale romance where the king fell to his knees and begged forgiveness for his ruthlessness. But it was honest. It was real. And it was more than she'd expected from a man who'd been forged in 6 years of torture and betrayal. He took his arm. Then let's go build something better. The main hall fell silent as they entered together. Hundreds of faces turned toward them, and Olivia felt the weight of their scrutiny like physical pressure. But she kept her head high, kept her stride even, and let them see what Ethan had seen from the beginning. An elemental who could tear down mountains or raise them at will, who had brought down the most powerful regime in pack history, who would stand beside her king and make sure justice meant something more than political convenience. The ceremony was ancient, the words unchanged for centuries despite the Council's attempts to erase them from pack memory. Ethan spoke first, his voice carrying through the hall with a kind of authority that made it clear he'd been born for exactly this moment. I am Ethan Ashworth, rightful Alpha King of the Unified Pack Territories. I was born to this throne, raised for sovereignty, and shaped by adversity into the ruler you see before you. Today I reclaim what was taken from me. But I do not reclaim it alone. He turned to Olivia, and the bond between them flared with shared purpose. I claim it with my fated mate, my elemental queen, the woman who holds the power to ensure that no ruler, including me, can ever again subvert justice for personal gain. Olivia stepped forward, and when she spoke, her voice was steady. I am Olivia Ashworth, Earth Elemental and Queen. I was born with abilities the Council feared and tried to eliminate. I was raised in obscurity, taught to hide what I am, trained by circumstance to see how power corrupts when left unchecked. She met the eyes of the assembled alphas, letting them see the truth of her. Today I claim this throne not because I sought power, but because I refused to let corruption thrive in darkness. My gift allows me to extract truth from the earth itself. I will use it to hold this government, and every pack leader in these territories, accountable to the laws they claim to uphold. An older alpha stood from his seat, one of the many who'd watched their testimony at the tribunal. And if you abuse that power, if you use it to eliminate anyone who disagrees with you, the way the Council did, then someone will stop us, Ethan replied without hesitation. That's the entire point. We're not claiming absolute authority. We're claiming responsibility. The responsibility to rule justly, to protect the packs, and to ensure that what happened under the Council never happens again. He looked at Olivia, and she felt his certainty through their bond. And if we fail in that responsibility, if we become the monsters we destroyed, then we'll deserve exactly what we gave to Thane and Lucas. The hall was silent for a long moment. Then the older alpha nodded slowly. Fair enough. The packs will hold you to that promise, your majesties. We're counting on it, Olivia said. The formal coronation continued. Oaths sworn, territories acknowledged, the transfer of power made official through ritual and law. But the real moment of transformation had already happened. The moment when a king and queen stood before their people and promised to be better than history, to break the chains of corruption and tyranny, to rule with a kind of fierce justice that didn't flinch from hard truths. When it was over, when the last alpha had sworn their oath and the celebrations had begun, Ethan led Olivia to the balcony that overlooked the territories spreading out below them. The sun was setting, painting everything in shades of gold and crimson that made the forests and mountains look like they'd been set on fire. This is what we're protecting now, Ethan said, his arm around her waist holding her against his side. Every pack, every shifter, every bloodline that survived the Council's purges. It's ours to defend and ours to govern. Are you ready for that responsibility? Olivia thought about the journey that had brought her here, from invisible records clerk to elemental queen, from suffocating her power to wielding it openly, from being claimed by a ruthless king to standing beside him as his equal. It wasn't the life she would have chosen, but it was the life she'd earned. I freed a dying wolf in chains, she said softly. And he rose as the Alpha King and refused to let me go. So now we're bound together, for better or worse, in power and in responsibility. She turned to face him, rising on her toes to press her lips to his in a kiss that was claim and promise and acceptance all at once. I'm ready. Let's break every chain that ever held us and forge something that lasts. Ethan's answering smile was fierce and proud and absolutely certain. Together then. My queen. My mate. My equal. Together, Olivia agreed. Always. And as the sun set on the first day of their reign, the elemental queen and her ruthless king stood united on a balcony overlooking their territories, bound by fate and choice and the shared determination to build something better from the ashes of corruption. The chains of the past had been broken. Now it was time to forge the future. Thank you for joining the pack today. If this story pulled you in, make sure to subscribe and tap the moon bell so you never miss the next Alpha Destiny. And tell me in the comments, Who should we follow next under the full moon?